after 9/11, nobody called on a ceasefire. In fact, many countries joined the United States in occupying two countries and killing hundreds of thousands of people. So Israel says this is our 9/11, and everyone is calling for a ceasefire. But when it was you that it was the terror was aimed against, everyone backed each other, and you went for war for 20 years. So there is a sense of Israel feeling that it's alone, and that it's the criticism coming, especially from the UN, is falling on deaf ears. It's people simply not listening to it.
Let me first start by asking you to give us a sense of the temperature around the city of Tel Aviv.
Well, in Tel Aviv, mostly what's happening here is that people are still demonstrating against the government for the release of the hostages. That's still the main focus in Israel. We have to remember that around 137 hostages are still inside Gaza. And almost every day we hear announcements from the government that a new hostage has been declared dead. So the focus inside Israel is and continues to be on the hostages. And obviously, if you cross the border into Gaza, it's a whole different issue. That's not really what people are talking about inside Gaza. They have their own issues to deal with, such as the humanitarian catastrophe.
Jotam, is what's happening in Gaza getting through to Israeli citizens? We are hearing from a top UN official saying that people are starving. There are estimates that 9 out of 10 families are going for entire days without eating. Is news like that reaching the people of Israel?
It's reaching, but I would say it's falling for deaf ears. First of all, Israel is not really listening to the United Nations. Israel has been extremely disappointed with the United Nations since the beginning of the war. And these announcements that come from the UN about famine and lack of electricity, it's something that Israelis and the rest of the world have heard for 2 months straight, more or less. And obviously there is a catastrophe unfolding, but for Israelis, that's not the concern. The concern is to destroy Hamas and to get their hostages back. And as Israel continues to point out, if Hamas were to surrender tomorrow and release the hostages, the war would be over, and the misery inside Gaza would be over.
What about certain Israeli publications that have been writing, for example, the death toll, for example, in Gaza being I think it's the publication's called Haaretz. Maybe I'm not pronouncing it correctly. Is that correct? Yes. They were talking about the civilian proportion of the total deaths shooting up by 61%. And the newspaper itself saying unprecedented killing, this ratio significantly higher than civilian toll in all the conflicts around the world during the 20th century. There are Israeli publications reporting on what's going on. Are you saying that this is not landing because the focus is still on those hostages?
It's both yes and no. First of all, Haaretz is a brilliant newspaper. I used to work there, so it's my colleagues reporting all of this, but it is a relatively small newspaper inside Israel. And most Israeli media, the big TV channels, the dailies, the big ones, are not reporting so much about what's going on in Gaza. And even if they are, like I said, there's very, very little sympathy and tolerance inside Israel for Gaza. People are fed up with so many years of attacks from Gaza, attacks from Hamas, and October 7th was simply the last straw. So many Israelis simply don't have sympathy anymore. They have pointed out over and over that Hamas seeks the destruction of Israel, and if there is a ceasefire tomorrow, Hamas will only use that ceasefire to regain strength and to commit another October 7th massacre. That's not Israelis saying that, that's Hamas saying it itself. So even though pictures are coming out, footage from Gaza is coming out, the main coverage inside Israel, I would say 80 to 90%, is about hostages and October 7th, the massacre, and what Israel militarily is doing inside Gaza, but much, much less on the humanitarian catastrophe.
And yet, Jotam, when we look at some of the polling conducted in Israel, only 19% of Israelis believe that the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, should remain in post. 72% believe he should resign. 41% are saying that should happen after the war, but an astonishing 31% say that he should resign immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's no doubt that Netanyahu is currently probably one of the least popular prime ministers in Israel's history. He is being held responsible, at least politically, for the failure to rein in Hamas. In fact, he has helped build Hamas metaphorically and literally by allowing millions of dollars to go into Hamas for the past couple of years. So people blame his policy. Netanyahu has been in power by far the majority of the time that Hamas has also been in power. So those two have kind of complemented each other in their policies. So he's extremely unpopular, but we have to also distinguish between Netanyahu and then between what the government is doing. Netanyahu as a person, as a prime minister, is unpopular, but the strategy currently laid out by the government, which is other people than him, has more backing, and much more backing. Most people actually agree that what his goal is the right one, to destroy Hamas, whether it be through military pressure or whatever it be. This is a goal that is shared inside Israel.
And what about the criticism that is starting to come Israel's way from, for example, we've seen the shadow foreign secretary here in the UK, David Lammy, being quite critical of the Israeli government at the moment and their actions in Gaza, the loss of innocent life. A lot of attention is now being shown again at West Bank, where Palestinians are being evacuated from villages at the same time as we're seeing what's happening in Gaza. Is that having an effect on the Israeli government or even the Israeli people and their opinions?
I think Israel is used to feeling quite alone in this conflict, that the public opinion around the world has always been with the Palestinians. As long as Israel knows that it has the backing of the United States, that's basically all it needs. Obviously, it would like to have the UK and France and Germany still on Israel's side, but the US is the most important ally here. So as long as the US gives Israel its backing, Israelis are mainly brushing this off because they point to a lot of hypocrisy here. After 9/11, nobody called on a ceasefire. In fact, many countries joined the United States in occupying two countries and killing hundreds of thousands of people. So Israel says this is our 9/11, and everyone is calling for a ceasefire. But when it was you that it was the terror was aimed against, everyone backed each other, and you went for war for 20 years. So there is a sense of Israel feeling that it's alone, and that the criticism coming, especially from the UN, is falling on deaf ears. It's people simply not listening to it.
What is life like in Tel Aviv for you and the citizens of Tel Aviv at the moment, Jotam?
I would say relatively normal. The first couple of weeks were extremely abnormal. People were staying inside. Very few people were on the streets. It's back to relative normal. But when you look at the streets, it's emptied. It's emptied out because 300,000 Israelis are currently in reserve. They're in the army now. Many of them are in Gaza, in the northern part of Israel. So you see less people. The economy is suffering immensely. Lots of farms, especially along the Gaza border, can't function anymore because they relied on Palestinian workers who are no longer here. So life is relatively normal, but there is a constant awareness of the fact that Israel is at war. It's impossible not to notice it. Have these posters of kidnapped people everywhere. This is what people talk about, but people are still going to work and they are on the streets, but just you can sense that war is in the air.